Yeah, for my name, just let me spend a few words about me and what I'm doing right now. My name is Dino Esposito. I've been spending years, decades in writing books about mostly .NET and web development. I had to start giving my perspective on this .NET 5. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, I had to make a decision on the next book to write, and I had two options ahead of me. One was focusing on ML.NET, the machine learning library for .NET, which is part of the whole .NET 5 thing. And the other option was to write an update to the ASP.NET book for ASP.NET Core coming with .NET 5. My decision was to start with the ML.NET programming reference book because why? Because I think I need time, months of real world experience, a few months at least, until I can have a clear idea of .NET 5 and how it works and the reasons why porting a new application to it makes sense. There are plenty of compelling reasons for doing that, but one thing is listing or reading about a list of reasons. Another thing is experiencing those reasons on your own skin. Okay, so this talk, Give Me .NET 5, is primarily intended to be a wrap-up, a state-of-the-art kind of presentation, technical but absolutely not much, so I won't be presenting any code. I will be more than happy to introduce you to other speakers coming later today. I already mentioned Raffaele Rialdi, which comes right after me, talking about the new C# and also giving some live demos, hopefully, of .NET 5 applications in action. And later on today, I already mentioned Jeff Prosize, another old friend of mine. Since the early days of the first .NET, which, by the way, for those who can still remember it, was released officially the 1.0 version in 2002. So it's 18 years ago. So I'm going to give you a hopefully a perspective of this thing and how it relates to existing, previous, current, today's versions. So today, 13th of October 2020, there is the latest version of .NET 5 is labeled as RC1. So there is the first release candidate, and this is the first of two release candidate versions before the official release scheduled to be someday in November. If I'm correct, RC1 was released about a month ago, so I expect in these hours, at most in the next few days, RC2 to be released. RC1, that's an interesting note, is a go live release, so it means that by that Microsoft assumes that you could go, in a way allows you to go live in production with software built on top of .NET 5 RC1. And this means that they offer support, typical support for applications put in production. Needless to say, .NET 5 can be downloaded for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Now, if I have to summarize what it is made of, I will identify probably three main blocks. One is .NET 5, which is essentially the new version of the .NET Core framework. And then ASP.NET Core, newer version. At first, I would say not much different from the latest 3.1 you may have used or are using in production today, and EF core. There is, in a way, you may notice from the graphics on screen at the moment, a little bit of, of conflict between the names. ASP.NET Core EF Entity Framework Core .NET 5. Actually, there is a reason for this apparently weird difference in the naming convention. Why 5? This is what follows is a real and to some extent sad or funny story depending on the perspective. Off the records, a Microsoft person revealed that enterprise IT decision makers, many enterprise IT decision makers, also those working for very large enterprises, at some point got confused by the numbers flowing around, always the same .NET moniker. So they hear .NET and then they got confused by the numbers, which is the version and how the version is related to the actual bits of code you could get. But those guys, those very smart guys, enterprise IT decision makers in very large companies also, they wanted, because it's their job, only the newest software in our department. We want the best, we want the newest, and always the newest. So they made at some point a very simple basic math comparison and found out that 4.7 is much bigger than 3.1. So why we should use .NET, this .NET Core 3.1, we want the newest, and 4.7 is much bigger than 3.1. Now this makes, usually, this should make you smile, laugh, probably, but it's sadly true. And this is the unofficial reason why Microsoft decided to rename the new version of .NET Core to increase the version number from 3 point something to 5, skipping 4, so that those guys can say, okay, 5 is bigger than 4.7, so let's go to .NET 5. And also for this reason, they decided to drop entirely the core from the moniker that identifies the framework. So we're gonna have .NET 5 and then ASP.NET Core to distinguish it from ASP.NET MVC running on any sort of past framework, and EF Core to keep it different, to make it clear it's different from entity framework that relates to previous versions of the past few years. So today, 13th of October 2020, the latest fully released software from Microsoft is made of these three main components: .NET Core 3.1, ASP.NET Core 3.1, Entity Framework Core 3.1. Now we will have soon the release of .NET 5, and we're gonna have .NET Framework version 5, ASP.NET Core, and EF Core. So this is the new state-of-the-art upcoming in just a few weeks from now. Later on, a year from the release of .NET 5, we're going to have another .NET Framework, another ASP.NET Core, another EF Core, labeled version 6. This is slated to be 2021 and 2022 .NET 7, and one major release per year. This is at least the roadmap I think that the longest roadmap I've seen stops at 2023. Okay, so it's pretty much a long, far ahead, far-sighted view. Now let's step back. Let's step back to the very beginning of the .NET story. It all started, as I recalled, around officially 2002, unofficially through alpha versions and beta versions around 2000, so 20 years ago. Can you believe it? .NET is 20 years old. I believe that the very first time I put my hands on .NET, on a runnable version of .NET was the summer of 2000, so 20 years ago. My daughter, she started studying computer science last week at university, was still in our thoughts, but was not born yet. So it's a lot of time. When .NET first version was released, it was made of 5 main blocks. There was libraries, .NET Framework. There was a web subsystem called ASP.NET. There was a database subsystem called ADO.NET. And then there were, of course, tooling, Visual Studio specifically, and languages. One of the most relevant reasons for building, and from the user perspective, one of the most compelling reasons to embrace .NET 20 years ago was just that switch, the different perspective you could have as a manager or as a simple developer about languages. Before .NET, the choice of the language to use to build an application was a serious issue. It could be a roadblock, could put roadblocks on your way, it could be a showstopper. Before .NET, you could go with C++ and use old-style libraries like Microsoft Foundation classes, or you could use Active Template Library, ATL, or you could write everything from scratch. You could have a very fast code. C++ was very fast 20 years ago, as much as it is the fastest way to build applications today. The problem with C++, especially 20 years ago, was that there was no easy way to access a database. Not that making a SQL call was problematic or impossible, but it forced you to go through a long list of low-level calls to prepare, to open a connection to a database and do error handling, to prepare a command to send to the database and do error handling, to add parameters to the command, to issue the command, to take the result set back and to parse the result set back to a C++ class. All this work had to be done repeatedly over and over again for every single call made to a database. On the other hand, there were also other languages, visual languages, the most prominent of which was Visual Basic. In Visual Basic, making a database call was pretty much fast, and fast to write at least, and was a kind of picnic, but doing low-level stuff was highly problematic, not impossible again, but very, very tricky. So for every new project, should we go C++? Should we go Visual Basic? It was not a trivial choice. With the arrival of .NET and the introduction of the virtual machine, the CLR, compiling code against the intermediate language, we had the great benefit of essentially normalizing the impact of the programming language on the building of applications. So you could use C#, which was the newest C++ or VBNet, which was the adapted version of Visual Basic, reuse those languages regardless, following your attitude and your preference, while obtaining exactly the same effect. So the language became, 20 years ago, just a parameter of your project, but it's crucial to keep in mind that before .NET, that was not at all the case. So we have these 5 main blocks: libraries, web, database, programming, and then tooling IDEs. That's exactly what we're going to have in 20 years later with this major, super major release of .NET. We're going to have a new, brand new, in many respects, the .NET 5 framework is a brand new framework. In which we'll see this in slightly more detail later on, but it's crucial to know that many foundational elements, foundational classes of the framework have been revamped 20 years later. Collection classes, for the most part, even in .NET Core, are nearly the same as they were 20 years ago. A number of performance improvements have been made in the internals of many low-level classes to give, with the framework in .NET 5, an overall increased sense of better performance. So we have a new library, .NET 5 framework. We have a web module called ASP.NET Core, which is primarily following the classic canonical MVC pattern, but is also well integrated with a number of output channel. Let me use this weird expression, where the HTML of views is just one possible way of getting output, but SignalR, gRPC, and plain JSON are other ways to output content. So what is called ASP.NET Core is not simply a way to build websites or web applications, but it's a way to have available any piece of software that needs to be reached over HTTP via the web. Database. In the beginning, it was ADO.NET, which was a not so thin wrapper around the SQL Server database, the Oracle database, and many other SQL databases. Today we have EF Core, which compared to ADO.NET is object-oriented. I remember, because I have gray hair, and someone says also that it was gray, now it's turning white. Anyway, ADO.NET was not an object-oriented framework, in the sense that it was not natively able to mix and match classes and database records. Doing the mapping properties of a class to fields of a record was possible, but required each and every time extra code. With EF Core, we had we started already with Entity Framework, and then today with EF Core we have this mapping coming automatically. And I remember the pain, the efforts, and the attempts, the failed attempts, since the days of ADO.NET to have a framework like Entity Framework. It was not an easy journey to move from ADO.NET to EF Core to a framework that allows to define your classes, and out of your classes can create or connect to databases. So EF Core is the newest 20 years later version of a subsystem to deal with persistent data persisted over tables. Languages. C# is still there. From C# 1 of 20 years ago, we are now going towards C# 9. And my friend Raffaele Rialdi will talk about the new features in C#9 after being and improved through books to be a great expert of the latest C#8. But VBNet is still supported, but it has lost over the last 20 years much of its original appeal. Frankly, nobody cares anymore much about VBNet. Another guy, I mentioned earlier in this presentation, Stephen Taub from Microsoft, program manager for the .NET 5 framework at Microsoft. When he was the managing editor of MSDN magazine, the premier Microsoft magazine that was discontinued a year ago, he was forcing me to write demos of my articles in both C# and VBNet. That was 10 years ago. Especially in the past 10 years, VBNet not disappeared physically, but it has lost most of its appeal. Today, if I have to nominate, to award the #2 language for the .NET 5 framework, that language is not VB, but is F#. And F#5 is coming to a new life with the upcoming release. Tooling, well, Visual Studio, if you want to stay on the Microsoft stack, will be, of course, updated. The latest is 2019, but it will be updated as soon as possible. But also, I want to mention here the existence today of alternative products, primarily Rider, as far as C# is the language, the primary language of choice. You probably have seen this similar graphics many times. Today we are more or less around the middle of the roadmap, which was unveiled a year ago. So in September 2019, Microsoft released .NET Core 3.0 with general availability. November 2019, they released with long-term support .NET Core 3.1. In a few weeks, we will have a .NET 5 general availability. A year from now, November 2021, .NET 6 with long-term support, followed 2022 by .NET 7 general availability, and again LTS long-term support for .NET 8 slated for November 23. As you can see, every other release, Microsoft changes the length of the support they offer for the framework, and also in a way that is the sign of the different perspective they internally have about that particular release. So what is the difference between GA, general availability, and long-term support? Long-term releases of .NET labeled as LTS will receive only critical and but compatible fixes throughout their life cycle. So LTS in a way is to be considered a more stable version. Stable in the sense that it will receive fixes, it will get changes that are necessary, and but not every other day. GA releases instead are more open in the sense that they will receive fixes, but also will be updated with innovations and new features, as long as those innovations and features prove in some way necessary. So LTS are to be the choice for those applications that have an expectedly very long lifetime. They are, at least, they should be at least the preferred choice. And now let's take a look at the elements that make up the .NET 5 ecosystem. In the gray part of this slide, you see what was the situation 20 years ago when the whole .NET thing started. In the beginning, it was .NET framework, it was ASP.NET, ADO.NET, languages like C# and VB.NET, and then Visual Studio as the primary tool. There was also Windows Forms to be added in the list, and over the years, new subsystems were added, like Windows Communication Foundation, Windows Workflow Foundation, Windows Presentation Foundation, WPF, and probably the last to list was the Xamarin ecosystem. With the advent of .NET 5, we have a new system, a new ecosystem made by analogous but conceptually identical modules. In between, there was the .NET Core parenthesis, which now, in sort of hindsight, we could perceive as a sort of transition between the old .NET world and the new .NET world. The .NET Core parenthesis, the rewrite of the framework on top of new concepts, would have been probably too much of an effort if done abruptly. So we perceive the .NET Core as a new thing, and with .NET 5 in a way is like, getting back to a simpler, cleaner world in which we still have a library of classes called the .NET 5, a web module called ASP.NET Core, a database module called EF Core, new languages, C# and F#, and new tools also, in addition to Visual Studio, from other companies, from JetBrains specifically, Rider as far as C# is concerned. What about the other frameworks that appeared over time, like WinForms, UI, Windows UI, Windows Presentation, Xamarin, WCF, and Workflow? There is new stuff also on top of the foundation of the .NET 5 ecosystem. For example, we have gRPC, which is not an exact one-to-one replacement for WCF. Just these days, I'm struggling in my normal business with calling legacy endpoints still returning data through WCF. And it's hard, very hard and problematic to explain to the young people working in my company, by the way, it's called Ubiquitous, what the hell WCF was. They find it so problematic, so weird to connect to an endpoint using nothing that is nothing but REST or nothing but gRPC. Yet, there was a time in which WCF was considered and was actually a great improvement. Today, we have embedded in the ASP.NET Core ecosystem a way to make direct point-to-point calls using the remote procedure call metaphor. The workflow, the Windows Workflow Foundation, which was originally released around 2005, so 15 years ago, that never gained a huge success, even though at the time in which it was released, the idea of a workflow tool and the workflow editor was very, very cool, and all companies looked like very eager to embrace it. In the end, for reasons beyond me, that never happened. Today, there is no way that Microsoft will port Workflow Foundation to a new life, but there is an open source project called the Core WF, which is expected to offer an open source infrastructure for building and consuming component-based workflows. As far as the Windows UI experience, .NET Core 3 also resurrected Windows Forms, but with .NET Core, with .NET 5, we have something called WinUI, which is another project aimed at giving you a unique Windows presentation experience. And when this experience, UI experience, moves towards devices, the former Xamarin ecosystem will become MAUI, multi-platform application user interface, which is only the first step towards .NET for iOS and .NET for Android. This is the state of the art. And now, the picture that all of you faced a year ago when Microsoft unveiled the roadmap until 2023, they presented exactly this slide. Now it probably makes more sense. We see the desktop segment, and WinUI is the updated version of this. Web, ASP.NET Core, okay, cloud. Mobile, this is MAUI. Gaming, okay, Unity. IoT, that's a story. .NET 5 has support for ARM processors, native support. And then AI, the AI ecosystem centered on top of ML.NET, and then tools. And underneath, the infrastructure made of languages, runtime components, and compilers. The core of this, the beating heart of this, is the new .NET 5 framework. Now, to cut the long story short, forget about .NET Core. From a few weeks from now, when .NET 5 is released, it's no longer .NET Core, it's .NET 5, period. One .NET. One BCL, base class library based framework, to handle all app models, whether it's mobile, whether it's desktop, whether it's web. Features. Now, in the remaining time, let me go over some more slightly technical aspects. In the .NET 5, you can expect features like single file applications, and I would say also subsequently smaller app sizes, especially for containers. A huge number of framework improvements. Just a quick example: richer JSON de-serialization, a complete set of nullable reference type in C#, many revised core classes, for example, most prominently collections, but also completely new. Here the list is made of two names: Blazor for let's say client-side C# running in the browser, and machine learning, and also new languages, C#9 and F#5, new hardware support for new hardware architecture, specifically ARM64. So we were talking about single file applications, nothing new compared to .NET Core, but only differences in the underlying implementation. In other words, in .NET 5, there will be no need for the system to unpack files to a temporary location before running, but everything will take place, let's say, automatically or automagically. So single file applications improved in .NET 5. By the same token, app trimming is in a way like going back to the old days of linkers. I remember linkers since my early days as a developer in the 90s. Linkers today are much smarter than they were 25 or 30 years ago, because linkers in .NET 5 are able to do static code analysis and cut automatically parts of code that did not get unused or reached. And this produces, of course, naturally smaller sizes of applications, especially in containers. Other sparse improvements here and there, but nearly everywhere in the classes, in the base class library, and in the supporting tool. It's interesting, this one, especially these days. The garbage collector is now a sort of contact tracing module, meaning that it works by constantly and periodically tracing, starting from some common roots, which are memory locations, instances that, like static variables that are known to be alive. So from there, it performs a sort of contact tracing algorithm that reaches the end of the tree of instances, and at the end of every pass, it knows exactly which elements are reachable, which are not reachable, and then marks as ready to be dismissed on the next step of garbage collector those that are not reached. So it's a way essentially to keep running contact tracing so that it's obvious which elements, which memory, which instances of memory are to be dismissed the next time. So this is a way, the way in which the garbage collector has been improved in .NET 5. The JIT also is improved, and it uses many more hardware intrinsic methods and runtime helpers to decide on the fly what has to be done. It's interesting to notice about the JIT that there is almost unbounded number of optimizations that can be added to the JIT, but the problem is not much the optimization in itself. The issue is that all those possible optimizations have to be done in a very short amount of time. So the challenge for the JIT is not much doing smart things, but deciding which of the million smart things it could do can be done, or it makes sense that are done in the short amount of time, because people want apps run fast. Libraries have been refreshed in core classes, and again, specifically the whole set of collection classes. The point is that, as I've mentioned many times, the foundation of .NET is 20 years old. Strings, everything used for text processing, collections, even the char type, regular expressions, async network processing, all those things added over time have undergone a relevant, significant revamp in .NET 5, and also the performance of JSON classes and link, in particular the order by and the memory manipulation of link, is now more performant than it was, and it is in .NET Core 3. And on top of this, support optimized for HTTP 2. New frameworks. Now, my favorite is Blazor. I've been a long time fan of Blazor. I think I was probably the first guy on the planet to write articles on Blazor. Today, I'm so happy that Blazor makes its official debut in prime time. What is Blazor? It's an infrastructure that allows you to run C# code directly in the browser. How this could happen? Using WebAssembly. So there is at the moment, so before .NET 5, there is a subset of the mono libraries that are compiled to WebAssembly, and those files are downloaded for every Blazor application in the browser. And this makes the magic of having .NET hosted in the browser through WebAssembly, so your C# code runs in a CLR within the browser. What changes in .NET 5 is that no longer a specific version of Mono is shipped, but the entire .NET 5 framework. So it's the same framework. So you have no sort of differences in the implementation and the behavior of classes. Okay, now business-wise, why is Blazor so compelling? Because Blazor is potentially an Angular killer. So with Blazor in prime time and fully supported, able to give you the full power of .NET 5, sure, you need TypeScript, sure, you need the model of Angular, you can have everything written in C#, and you can share libraries between your server and client code. This is a significant, strong, compelling reason for at least seriously considering Blazor, especially for new projects, as a serious alternative to Angular. Any .NET developer could be a Blazor developer. You don't need special developers with special skills in Angular, React, this or that. By the way, I see here, given my age, the same winning pattern behind web forms 20 years ago. Web forms had a huge, immense success that still endures today because it enabled any Visual Basic C backend developer to be overnight, to turn overnight into a web developer. Blazor is offering the same potential. Now, put another way, Blazor is Silverlight just done better, or Silverlight 10 years later. Silverlight was another brilliant idea at the wrong time. Blazor is revamps the idea, but does it just better. And in a way, in my opinion, it offers a perspective of web development as it should ever be. So just a way to write code using a serious language and not JavaScript. MAUI, multi-platform .NET App UI, formerly Xamarin Forms, just a new name and new infrastructure, new environment, new ecosystem for Xamarin Forms. Single stack to support all modern platforms, Android, iOS included. That's important. This is the first step towards having .NET for iOS and .NET for Android, which are slated for the next version of .NET 6 to be released a year from now. And WinUI, it's announced, hopefully will be the new UI common platform for Windows, any sort of Windows application, and it's hopefully the target, the final destination of existing apps written with anything like MFSC, MFC, WinForms, WPF, moving towards a new common UI. It's only preview 2 at this time. Here is the link to learn, and maybe, and hopefully, if you have questions or are curious about this, I can only forward your question to my dear friend Raffaele Rialdi, which is he knows a lot more than me about this thing. Core WF, not part of .NET 5, not part of it. It's a project hosted at the .NET Foundation, porting of the Microsoft Windows Workflow Foundation, possibly part of future versions of .NET, but it's not at the moment officially part of that. It's a .NET Core based implementation of an application that allows you to build multi-step processes composed of activities. ML.NET is machine learning in .NET. Now, machine learning is usually considered something that has to do with Python and with libraries like Scikit or TensorFlow or Keras or whatever else, PyTorch, whatever. But when you go to using Python for ML.NET, okay, except the building of neural networks, so except TensorFlow and Keras, the main problem, especially with Scikit, is how you manipulate data, how you prepare data, how you work data. So memory management, file management are not optimal with Python. And to keep Python code for those heavy tasks optimized, you have to switch to hosting C code in Python. At that point, why using Python? ML.NET comes as a way to go into the world, the dazzling new world of machine learning from the background of .NET code. You will find .NET classes to do essentially scikit-like algorithms for classification and for anomaly detection and for prediction problems. Everything right in .NET. This is a huge benefit. I'm not using it already. I won't be honest on this. I'm not using it, but a couple of projects that I'm on these days, as soon as they will ship as .NET 3.1 LTS code, they will experience the port to .NET 5. This will happen likely mid next year. So I'm not using .NET 5 already. And now to finish off, just a few sparse thoughts to drive you towards the end of the presentation. Using the latest version of C#, C#8, waiting for C#9 proved much better and productive than using any older version, period. So C#9 with the new type records that and the nullable type references and all the new features that it brings that Raffaele will talk about right after me. Yeah, there's an invitation. There is no reason for not using always constantly the latest version of C#. Possibly in combination with tools, including those built into Visual Studio and those coming with external products like ReSharper, that in a way force you to code, taking advantage of the language features the best or the recommended way. That helps, because your code is at least a lot more readable. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, a great language also comes with a great environment, which could be the native Visual Studio or another environment like Rider or Visual Studio extended with, empowered with tools like ReSharper. That is the combination for building great code as a developer. Because in a way, in my, again, humble opinion, it teaches self-discipline. And this is the best thing you can teach your developers, to your young developers, how to do things in the right way, in such a way they don't know how to do things wrong. This is a problem that how to write effective code and how to write good code is largely made it a simpler problem by the use of more and more sophisticated tools. What remains to be done is, and that can hardly be taught, is how you match code to real world problems. I believe that in the future, more than to solve problems, we'll be called to anticipate problems, and that can only come through analysis. Analysis of the business context and modeling code and the frameworks you use. They are not in the same pipeline, but frameworks and analysis and modeling of problems, as I see things, in my humble opinion, are orthogonal to each step. So they have something in common, but they're not. There is no strict relationship. Orthogonal in statistics refers to entities, to two entities not strictly correlated through a clear and well-defined relationship. However, through the comparison of those entities, you perceive a sense of overlapping to some extent, like in geometry, things that are orthogonal meet, but each going in its own way. That's it. So I think that I'm pretty much done. So I'm waiting for questions. If there are some, guys.
There are some questions, of course. First of all, congrats for the presentation. We got a tiny interruption, but I think we managed to finalize it very well.
Oh, yeah, good. Too kind of you.
We have time for a couple of questions. I actually had a personal one, and you touched a bit upon it. So if I talk to people about Blazor, I think I can make out two types of discussions. One are people such as yourself or Marco, who'll be speaking on tomorrow, that like Blazor a lot and like where it's heading. They also it's obvious that Microsoft is investing a lot into it. And then there's the other group that says, yeah, it looks interesting, but I want to wait a bit. What if it's the new Silverlight, or it has the same fate as Silverlight?
I can tell you a story that was told me off the records in a private conversation with Microsoft people involved in Blazor. This was something happened about 2 years ago. So in the very early days. One thing that I learned is that Blazor was born as a joke, but the people who created it in the beginning got immediately the sense of the power of the thing that by chance they had discovered, but they had a very hard time selling the project within Microsoft. So I wouldn't say that at all times, past times, Microsoft was strongly committed to Blazor. They, in a way, even within Microsoft, there were many groups of people going against Blazor. But Blazor survived, and it made its debut last year in the server-side version, and it makes the official full debut also as a client-side method. I understand people being a little bit, calm,
a bit.
Yeah, quiet against. Okay, let me wait. Let's wait and see. And I think I believe to this camp of people. Let's wait and see. But at the same time, I'm not skeptical about it. I do recognize its tremendous potential. But at the same time, if I have a team of people that are skilled with Angular, with ASP.NET, with whatever, I don't feel much confident today switching them for a critical project to a complete new framework. So this is my position. I think I belong to the group of people that are still a little bit reluctant to jump on the bandwagon right away. But I'm not skeptical at all about Blazor. I've never been.
Yeah, coincidentally, while we were talking, also a question about this came up. Like, is it realistic or a good way to migrate existing MVC application to Blazor?
My answer at this time would be no. But I would go with if I have to give it a chance, it would be for a new application or a new front end on top of an existing. So for new stuff, for new things. I wouldn't consider dropping entirely something that works for Blazor. At the same time, if I have to rewrite, because that's a scheduled plan, something maybe not now, but a few months from now, I would seriously consider Blazor.
Yeah, it's sort of a, I don't know, software modernization approach. So, I mean,
exactly, it's part of the modernization pipeline. Yes.
Yeah. And yes. You change something if there are changes there. Otherwise, if it works, just leave it. Okay, that's good. I think there was another one. I think we have time for one more. Yep. Hold on, I'm looking for it. What would you recommend in terms of migrating existing code to .NET 5? Or what would be an approach? I think that's the question.
Let's say, I hope that moving from 3.1 to 5 is not big deal. If that's the case, why not? As soon as possible. I mean, maybe not today, but we started the project. Important project in August, And honestly, I was seriously tempted to go straight on .NET 5. Probably if I start today relevant projects, now I would go straight on .NET 5. I plan to bring this big project of mine to .NET 5 as soon as we hit the first release, which is expected to be end of the year. So I expect early next year to bring to port a 3.1 project to .NET 5, or to seriously consider doing that. Probably today, but 2 months ago was different. Probably today I would seriously consider for a brand new greenfield project to go straight on the .NET 5.
Okay, well, great. I hope this answers the question.